Welcome to Spectral Shadows, where the darkness whispers and the unseen lurks. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because horror feels different at night, especially when you're alone. Those who love their mother, like, share, and comment. Subscribe, if you dare. Now turn off the lights, and let's begin. Story number 1. My grandfather sat in his rocking chair, holding his body rigid like that of a corpse. His eyes looked like those of an old dog. His lips constantly chattered, and his fingers trembled with the Parkinson's that was eating him away like a cancer. We both knew he didn't have long left. He looked at me with his strange yellow eyes and gave a weak grin. "Elias, I think I should tell you the story of my childhood," my grandfather said, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I will tell you of what happened to me when I was only 13 years old, when I was sent to Auschwitz with my father by my side." This is the story he told me, unbelievable as it is. Though my grandfather has been dead for years now, his story still stays with me to this day as an unbearable burden on my heart. I still remember the moment we arrived at the camp like it was yesterday. We were exhausted and starving. We'd been on the cold cattle cars for 5 days and 5 nights, and we were given no food or water that entire time. Many of the sick and old died on the way. We moved their corpses to the corner of the car, and my father said Kaddish over their corpses. It was the first time I saw the light of life, extinguished from the eyes of so many in so short a time. But it would be far from the last. Finally, long after the night had come, the doors to our cattle cars slid open. Pale, starving creatures in striped black and white rags stood around SS soldiers in black, spotless uniforms. They grinned as the death's head insignia and sharp lightning bolt runes gleamed bright silver. The SS men all had vicious German shepherds who lunged at the frightened prisoners, gnashing and snapping at the air. I saw more than a few people get bit by the vicious dogs. They had deep bite wounds and chunks torn out of their flesh, and we all learned to avoid the dogs and the SS men as much as possible after that. In the dark night, we were formed into lines. Old women held the hands of their small grandchildren, and sons tried to stay with their fathers. We moved forward. Up ahead I saw a man in a black SS uniform whistling a tune from Wagner. I would later realize that this man was Dr. Mengele. I tried to stay with my father, but the surging crowds pulled us apart. I didn't know it at that moment, but I would never see my father again if I had known. Would I have acted differently? Would I have told him how much I loved him? I'll never know, but his ashes rose up into the air later that night, and I saw it from the freezing barracks in that place of shadows. Someone behind me whispered in my ear, "Boy, how old are you?" 13, I said, turning to look at the strange figure, a starving man in a striped uniform. The man shook his head. "No, you're 16. When you get up there, remember that. You're not 13, you're 16, the man insisted. He was part of the prison commando that helped the SS with translating the many languages that streamed into the camp, and also helped them organize the prisoners for slave labor or death. I would never see that starving man again, but I followed his advice. As I got up to Dr. Mengele, he stopped whistling for just a couple seconds. The black cloudless sky hung heavy above us, the clouds of smoke rising up from the crematoria with the smell of burning hair and searing flesh. Dr. Mengele gave me a fatherly smile, but in his eyes there was something as cold as frozen steel, hiding just under the surface. I could see it. I could feel it in the air. I could almost smell it, radiating off of his skin. It sent ice water racing through my veins. "Hello, son," he said in a warm voice as he gave a faint smile, though his eyes didn't smile, and as I think back on it, neither did his mouth. "What's your age?" 16, I said confidently, looking him straight in the eye. "Any physical deformities? Any illness?" he asked, the faint half-smile like a statue of Buddha still plastered across his lips. I shook my head. "No, sir," I said. He nodded and pointed to the right. I didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. I saw, to my growing horror, that most of the prisoners were going to the left, including all the elderly, all the children, anyone with disabilities, and anyone who looked too frail or emaciated. In all, about 90% of the line went to the left, and about 10% went to the right. Those who went to the left wouldn't live out the hour. They would be stripped naked, beaten and bludgeoned to force as many people into the gas chamber as possible. Then the heavy metal door would be sealed. The Zyklon B pellets would be dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid, and the vents would turn on, whirring like hornets, breathing their deadly poison into the concrete tomb. The screams in the chamber often went on for over 20 minutes. The corpses would be intertwined in pyramids, their arms and legs caught together like rats in a rat king. The cyanide gas prevented their lips and fingernails from turning blue and made the corpses look pink, almost healthy, except for their frozen, terrified death masks and sightless eyes. In 1944, while I was at Auschwitz-Birkenau, I was coming back late from a work detail in the nearby concrete factory with some other inmates. We passed through the freezing winds and whipping snow that bit like an ice pick into our bodies. There were open-air pits that belched black smoke into the air constantly. What a world we lived in, where the graveyards rose into the sky and the blackness of space descended on those below. That was the night when my faith in God finally died forever. As I would learn later, the SS had a recent shortage of Zyklon B, the cyanide pellets, used to exterminate masses of human beings and turn them into ashes and fetid, reeking smoke. The advances of the Red Army had caused issues with delivering it, and a transport of children had just come into the camp. The SS men and the capos loaded these children, most of whom were no older than 7 or 8, onto the beds of 2 dump trucks, beating them with truncheons and kicking and punching them. When the crying bloody children were finally all settled in on the back of the dump trucks, they had drivers back them up towards the inferno of burning bodies. I watched, horrified, as they slowly angled the beds downwards. The children began sliding out with horrible, wretched screams. They fell into the pit of fire. I watched their hair burn, their skin blacken and sizzle, the drops of fat melt and drip off their shrieking lips. Some of them tried to crawl out, but the black-clad SS men went around with long sticks and pushed the half-dead, writhing children back into the scorching flames. My grandson, I tell you truthfully that this is what I saw with my own eyes, heard with my own ears, when I was only 13 years old. The screams of the burning children went on for 15 or 20 minutes. It felt like, at that moment, we stood in the center of the universe. God had died. He had murdered eternity and left us alone in this endless pit of suffering and death. There was no justice, I knew, and if God was real at all, then he was either evil or insane. The faraway stars of cold white light seemed to turn and look down on us, all of us, the living and the dead alike. The wind whipped past us, screaming with the voices of the damned. Sometimes, late at night, I think I still hear those children screaming as their bodies burned and blackened. Is it any wonder, then, that I almost never sleep? And when I do, I wake up shrieking as mountains of pale, burning corpses flash across my mind. One day, during selection, I saw Dr. Mengele again. He looked me up and down and wrote something on a clipboard. Later that day, I was told by the capo that I would be moved to the medical ward. The medical ward? I asked, confused. Why? I'm not sick. The doctor requests your presence, the capo said sarcastically, giving me a little bow. He was a fat man with a face like a bulldog and red hands like a butcher. He loved to beat and rob the prisoners under him. Move, scum, double time. Get your ass to the medical barracks. I didn't need to be told twice. I quickly scurried away, constantly glancing back to make sure no blows from his fat hands would rain down on my head. I wound my way through the bare wooden barracks that acted as our homes. The homes for walking skeletons of men whose bodies were frozen and dying. Within these barracks, we were often packed so tightly together on the hard wooden planks that one man couldn't turn around in the night without every other man in the row having to move. But when the freezing winter cold blew in, and we only had thin blankets and our black and white striped rags, the body heat from the others kept us from freezing to death. At least some of the time. Corpses were taken out of the barracks every morning. Prisoners who died from the cold, from hunger, from dysentery or disease, from beatings and murders and suicides. It was like a constant stream of death, a waterfall of oblivion crashing forward. The corpses came, but the fire ate them all greedily and exhaled only fetid black smoke in response. I walked into the medical barracks, sat on a chair, waiting. I saw my friend from the work commando, Moshe. His dark, serious eyes stared through me, as if he didn't see me. He had a straight nose and high cheekbones on his aristocratic face, though he now looked as pale and starved as I did myself. No more than a bag of bones wrapped in skin and clad in rags. Eliezer, Moshe said, suddenly realizing I was there. Were you chosen for this too? I nodded grimly, not knowing what he was referring to, but feeling in my heart it was nothing good. Nothing good ever came from this camp, after all. Nothing but reeking smoke and ashes came from it. Nothing but the hurricane of souls whipped away in the currents of the Zyklon B came from it. Do you know why we are here? I asked, fidgeting and nervous. I glanced around, seeing a clean, well-stocked medical room beyond, with a surgical table in the middle. There were bunks in the back of the medical barracks where the lucky ones would live. We even got increased rations of sawdust bread and watery soup. Dr. Mengele wants us, Moshe said simply, and his eyes looked through me again. His mind seemed to drift off, far away from this world of suffering. My emaciated body was such a heavy thing. It felt like the weight of the entire universe was contained within that body. I despised that body, that starving, sickly thing that followed me like a shadow. I wanted to be free of it, to see the highest reality without a body, to see truth without this constant suffering and agony, the constant hunger and cold and beatings and the stench of death. But it wasn't to be. Dr. Mengele walked into the barracks a few minutes later, surrounded by female nurses clad in white. He looked at me and Moshe. His cold blue eyes sparkled with intelligence. He always kept his black SS uniform perfectly cleaned and ironed. It gave an impression that some black knight from a lost tale of the Dark Ages had just wandered in. He held a clipboard in his hand. He glanced down at it, frowning. Then he spoke in clipped German. A9971 and A8991, you are hereby required to participate in a medical experiment that will test the effects of certain drugs on the body. We do this under the authority of the Greater German Reich and our Reichsführer SS Himmler. You will stay here in the medical barracks until the experiment has ended, Dr. Mengele said. As soon as he was done, he walked briskly over to the dark room with the surgical table. He came back out, with 2 syringes filled with some black fluid that shone with glittering rainbows. He came up to me first. 99971, your arm," Dr. Mengele demanded. I stretched out my arm. He applied a tourniquet. When the vein throbbed like a fat worm, he plunged the needle inside and pressed down on the plunger. I felt something like lava ripping its way through my body as my breath caught in my throat. I thought I was choking and dying. My heart beat so fast in my chest that I feared it must explode. Dr. Mengele walked over to Moshe as my vision turned white. I groaned, my teeth chattering, and then I fell forward onto the wooden floor. I must have lost consciousness because when I awoke, it was night in the medical barracks. I found myself laying on a bunk. A small serving of sawdust bread and thin, watery soup was laid down next to me. Still sleeping, I saw the form of Moshe, his face as pale as a skull. "Moshe?" I whispered, trying to push myself to my feet. My head throbbed. I looked down at my arm, seeing a spreading patch of blackened necrotic tissue spreading from the injection site. It almost looked like shiny scales were spreading across my skin. I looked down at Moshe's arm and saw the same dark patches there. "Wake up, Moshe, please. I need you. I need someone. I can't do this alone." But in my heart, I knew that we were all born alone, and we all died alone. Moshe couldn't help me with anything. Even God couldn't help me here. He didn't listen to our prayers or hear the Kaddish read for the dead. He had turned his face away from us, and every dying heart there felt that great emptiness as the life was extinguished from their eyes. I shook Moshe gently, not wanting to scare him. His eyes flew open. He looked up at me, and I saw with horror that something was wrong. His eyes had become slitted and yellow, like the eyes of a serpent. He hissed at me. A thin stream of frothy blood bubbled from his throat as he gurgled, pushing himself up like a zombie. "What's happened to you?" I asked in panic, backpedaling away from the transformed Moshe. He looked like a rabid animal, his eyes gleaming with insanity. He came at me, and his teeth looked longer, sharper, more predatory. They looked like fangs. He leapt off the bunk, soaring through the air towards me. As he gnashed his teeth, I frantically tried to push him away. His jaw snapped together with a crack like a bullwhip. He lunged forward, and his bleached white face came down. I felt the skin on my face tear with a pain like fire spreading through my head. He bit down on my cheek and ripped upwards, leaving a mutilated flap of skin hanging there. I felt something hot and poisonous coursing through my bloodstream. But unlike Moshe, I had not gone insane. I felt my teeth lengthening, though, and my eyes abruptly adjusted to the dark. I could see every mote of dust floating through the air, see every spatter of my blood on the swept wooden floors. A hiss tore its way out of my throat. My arm lunged forward, as if with a mind of its own. Sharp claws ripped their way out of the ends of my fingers as I threw Moshe off of me. He ran out into the night, hissing and wailing, his forked tongue flicking out between his bloody lips. A few moments later, I heard SS men yelling at the nearby perimeter, and then guns started firing. The banshee wail from Moshe grew louder, and the SS men screamed, their voices filled with panic and terror. I staggered out of the medical barracks, seeing Moshe clawing and biting at the black-clad form of an SS man. 2 others lay dead next to him, their throats torn out, the mutilated flesh sliced wide open. Moshe leapt off of the dying SS man and loped towards the electrified fence. In horror and astonishment, I watched him swipe at it with his claws. It gave a loud pop of electricity, and I saw a flash of blue light, but the black scales that now covered almost all of Moshe's skin only seemed to glow brighter, gleaming like obsidian. Moshe remained unaffected. He ripped a hole in the fence as it continued sizzling, leapt over the razor wire, and disappeared into the dark forests of Poland beyond. After a long moment, staring at the bodies of the SS men, I ran forwards, toward freedom as well, following the trail of Moshe. I still had my mind, however. Whatever poison Dr. Mengele had given us hadn't affected me like it had affected Moshe. But still, I noticed I was healing faster. The deep gash on my cheek stopped bleeding within minutes, and a layer of thin black scales started to cover the wound. Over the next few weeks, I made my way to Switzerland, where I spent the rest of the war. But I heard rumors in the forests of Poland that there was a strange creature attacking isolated farms and houses. A creature with slitted eyes like a serpent's, and black scales covering his deformed, twisted body. My grandfather stopped speaking suddenly, looking up at me with glazed eyes. "Do you believe it, Elias?" he asked. "Do you believe what I've told you?" I nodded. He pulled up his sleeves, and there, on his arms, I saw black scales covering his skin all the way to the wrists. Story number 2. As far as I remember, I've always been fascinated about road trips, ever since I was little. The factor of such definitely came from my dad, who once worked as a truck driver and would often bring me along with him. Now being grown up and all, those sweet memories eventually faded along with time. The last time I graduated was nearly a decade ago. All the jobs that I took were merely a part of an inconsistent, unpleasant career that barely supported my financial burden. Being nearly stuck in a dilemma, I finally decided that it was time I find a stable career with a job that I actually enjoy. Fast forward to a few months after, I couldn't be much happier to have finally possessed a competent truck driver's license after digging out my remaining money for the lessons. The moment I took hold of it, I did not waste time to seek for companies that would hire me. It took some quick browsing before I found a small, unnoticed company that offered good bucks. It introduced itself as a meat company and desperately needed new drivers as demands were increasing lately. I partook in an interview and, sure enough, secured the job since they were unexpectedly that desperate. My orientation was right on the next day. Prior to it, my new boss ordered me to sign some terms and contracts and handed me a set of documents, which he described it as the company's rules and regulation. Since the goods I transport are fresh meats, it means that I had to drive midnight, carrying them from the factory to its destination before morning for the public to purchase and consume. The orientation went smoothly, and I quickly adapted to the lifestyle of a trucker within days. During my first few days as an amateur, I was accompanied by my supervisor who observed my driving. He told me that it was a protocol for a driver to be accompanied along the ride, but most of the time I would have to be alone due to worker shortages. Therefore, driving solo wouldn't be an uncommon thing in this company. Well, it was pretty awesome driving around late night, enjoying the night view, although I still needed to arrive on time. Other than that, I was coping with the job really well. One usual night, as I arrived to my company to start my job, I was greeted by my slumbery boss, who told me that I needed to handle today's delivery alone. I glared at him momentarily before nodding and walked toward the six-wheeled rigid fridge truck that I've been working on. It was my first ever solo. The engine of the truck roared alive as I turned the key forward. The headlights illuminated the wall in front of me with such brightness that I had to look away momentarily. Next thing, I shifted the gear and drove towards the loading bay as I was taught. The ramp gradually opened as I pressed one of the buttons, exposing cool nitrogen gas out into the already cold atmosphere. Sounds of rumbling faded in as a forklift carrying meat packages unloaded into the container creating bangs and impacts, which shook the truck and me inside of it. As soon as I heard a familiar tap pattern, I instantly recognized it as a signal and shut the ramp close. It wouldn't take long before I exited the factory and took the main road. The GPS voice made an indistinguishable announcement: "Your journey to Joe's Meat Market, Oregon, is 109 miles northwest. Have a safe drive." Initially, I drove through residential areas before passing by farms and factories. It wasn't until I had to make a turn into a smaller road, which would cover the majority of my trip. The streetlights weren't well lit, which gave the road a gloomy appearance. As I advanced for 30 miles, streetlights no longer cover the roads, and all that was left illuminated was the headlight of my truck, the dashboard, and the glittering stars across the sky, and on occasion high beam lights from passing cars. All around me were lush, thick forests, making the surrounding extra darker. The truck's engine's vibration as it cruised down the road shook my body throughout the drive. Staring at the illuminated road, I couldn't stop myself from thinking the set of special rules that I have read earlier. Special rules. In this section of rules, it is obligatory for every worker to abide every rules that were listed. Failure to do so will almost guarantee a life-threatening hazard. This version covers special rules for long-haul truck drivers. Rule 1. As you are operating as a night shift driver, it is obligatory to keep the headlights on at all times, especially on dark roads, even when your truck is stationary. This might sound simple, but extremely important for safety reasons. As I recalled such rule, I wondered why was it in the special list when it was a literal common sense in the real world. I took a turn at a sharp corner and accelerated the truck. As I stepped on the pedal, I recalled the second rule. Rule 2. If you are driving in a remote area, abide the traffic rules if there are vehicles nearby. However, if you are completely alone, try to cruise at a higher speed as to quickly avoid unwanted visitors. The last phrase sent chills down my spine. What the hell was a visitor? I mean, who wants anything from a meat truck? That was when I jerked on the brake pedal in a sudden as a figure quickly approached ahead of me. It was a person who seemed lost. Thinking of the following rule, I did not stop the truck, and instead swerved and overtook him. Rule 3. Never allow anybody to ride on the truck, even stranded or lost people. Failure to do so will result in an immediate disqualification from this company, if you're lucky enough not to fall into its trap. Staring at the rear-view mirror and the dashboard camera, I couldn't help myself but curse under my breath. Why not? This was getting frustrating. Just a few minutes after the incident, a yellow indicator popped out on the dashboard. Something I really wish hadn't happened to me right now. The truck's engine compartment began filling with smoke, and traces of it escaped through the crack of the hood, forcing me to halt the truck. Apparently, luck couldn't get any worse as the engine overheated in the middle of a creepy forest. Water coolant was running low, and so I stepped out of the truck to grab the water jerry. As I opened the door, a cool breeze blew over my body, sending chills within my body. I embraced myself and shone the torchlight towards where I was facing. I clumsily waddled to the side of the truck, both legs still cramped from the tedious driving. Then, I pulled a trigger, which opened the hood of the truck. I could feel the heat radiating onto my body from the overheated engine. I took a quick break before pouring some water into the coolant tank. I left the hood open for some time while I chilled inside the cabin. It was then that I realized my delivery had to be inevitably delayed. It took almost half an hour for me to be confident enough to continue the journey. As I stepped outwards again to shut the hood, something bizarre happened. The same guy that I overtook a while ago appeared behind my truck, completely dumbfounded but somehow expecting it. I glanced towards him as he slowly approached me. He was in his 40s, had brown hair, and appeared to be dirty and torn, and looked emotionless. In a deep monotone voice, he asked, "Why did you not stop just now?" I hesitated for a while before replying, "Sorry, but company doesn't allow us to pick up strangers. In the middle of nowhere, and you think it's okay for me to be alone here?" "Look, I'm sorry," I stuttered, but a car suddenly drove past us, its high beam distracting my view on that guy. I covered my eye with my arm. As I put my hand down, the guy seemed to be nowhere, except he was now at my right side. My heartbeat skipped, but I remained in composure. "What are you waiting for? I'm not letting you go this time." His face began to show irritation. "All right, just stay here while I get things done." I walked to the front of the truck to shut the hood, all while shivering from the sudden change of aura that this guy gave. I quickly stepped into the cabin and instinctively shut the door, barricading myself from the man outside, and activated the locks. The click on the door as it locked was something I anticipated so much that it gave me a quick sigh of relief. The man appeared beside me, now knocking on the door, probably wondering why I locked myself in, or maybe not. My heartbeat raced as I rushed for the keys and ignited the engine. The rumbling came again, but I was so grateful that I could feel it again. I instantly shifted to first gear and accelerated ahead. The guy's yell and knocking was suppressed by the loud diesel engine, but I could already imagine him cursing as he banged on the truck. As the truck gained speed, the banging shifted all the way to the back of the truck, and then came silence. That was when I heard a bone-chilling scream. That was not a human's scream. It sounded too unearthly. My primal instinct could sense evil behind the deafening roar. I glanced at the rear of my truck, only to visualize a traumatizing silhouette, which was now chasing me. From I could see, it stood 6 feet tall, even with all 4 of its legs. Its appearance was too dark, but I could definitely notice a darker patch of eyes staring into my side mirror, right into my soul. Its serrated row of teeth, hungry for flesh. The figure approached rapidly as the truck's rear light illuminated the unearthly creature in red. I could hear bangs on the side of the truck. It was attempting to breach the container. I brake-checked unexpectedly, making the creature unable to react in time and tumbling onto the asphalt. I accelerated harder this time and fled the scene. That was when another rule popped into my memory. Rule 4. If something is following you, do not let them catch up to you. Do your best to survive. Something? Is that creature the something they're referring to? I tried to connect the dots while simultaneously focusing on the road. Adrenaline was rushing endlessly when all of a sudden, a horde of the similar creature flanked from the side of the road. My jaw dropped as I was flabbergasted by the sudden attack. I swerved to avoid them and hit one of them. I felt a huge crash, but the truck kept on going. Series of bangs and clangs reverberated the truck's chassis as the container was constantly ambushed mercilessly by the creatures. Couldn't think much of a solution as they gradually broke in. I couldn't thank my luck more as a tunnel approached in front. Taking this opportunity, I swerved right and took down 3 to 4 of these creatures off the truck. I could hear the splatter noise as they were brutally crushed between the truck and the tunnel. I did the same at the left side of the truck as I crossed the double line and skidded against the tunnel. The creatures at the other side were also ruthlessly obliterated. The tunnel ended as the last creature's body laid onto the ground from the devastating blow. I celebrated momentarily, punching the steering wheel as soon as I exited the tunnel. I drove for another 5 miles, still high on adrenaline. I did not notice the sharp curve in front of me, and the massive truck battered into the woods as I couldn't react in time. The truck was too fast. I was running for my life. The truck came to a complete halt, jolting me forward like a dummy rag doll. I cursed under my breath. I just thanked that my seatbelt saved my ass. I shifted into reverse gear, but horror dreaded upon me as I realized that the RPM was at its maximum. This only meant one thing: the wheels were stuck. Fuck! I screamed in panic and in pain. I scanned around me. No vehicles were around. I was completely left alone. I felt hopeless by then. I already called my boss, and he promised to send a tow truck as quick as possible. I hid in my truck for about 15 minutes now. I don't think they'll ever make it. Reason so. I could hear the creatures from a mile away now, approaching at an alarming rate. Story number 3. When I first took this job to be an over-the-road trucker, I thought it would be really exciting. I thought I'd get to travel the country and see the sights, and come home with stories to tell my friends and family. I was right. This job is exciting, but I soon found that I'm better off not sharing these stories with anyone close to me. Not because I don't trust them, but because I'm worried they wouldn't believe me. Let me back up. My name is Brittany. I'm 22 years old, and I've been driving with a rather large company for a few months now that I won't name due to obvious reasons. Ever since my training ended and I got my own truck to start solo, I've seen some pretty weird shit. When you're driving the loneliest road in America, yes, that's its real name, in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, things can start to get to you. I suppose it was only a matter of time before I saw something. Out in the desert at nearly midnight, I still had another hour to the nearest truck stop, and blasting the freezing cold air against my face was all I could do to keep myself from dozing off at the wheel. Irresponsible, I know. But until you work this job, you don't understand how much lax comes with it. I was driving this highway, in the desert, in the pitch blackness of a cold summer night, when suddenly something runs out in the road in front of me. Before I can even react, it's gone across the other side into the bushes. I barely got a good look at it, but I could have sworn it looked like a large white dog, faster than any dog I've ever seen. I tried to just ignore it and keep driving. I see animals crossing the road at night all the time. It didn't seem like anything to get worked up about. Not even a minute later, I feel my truck lurch to the left and into the other lane. I quickly try to swerve and correct it, and easily step on the brake so I don't wreck. It can be easy to jackknife an 80,000-pound metal death machine. I slow it down and regain control. I look for the nearest pullover spot so I can see what the hell just hit my rig and see if there's any damage. Once I find a spot and turn off, hit my brakes and hop out, I walk around to the other side and see a large dent in the side of my trailer. What the fuck? I say to myself as I walk over to inspect the side of the trailer. It's a huge dent, at least 5 feet wide and tall. No real shape to it, just a general dent. I can't imagine what could have hit me. My first thought was maybe a boulder rolled down from the side of the hill and smashed into me. But I didn't think I was driving next to any hills or mountains. As far as I knew, it was flat desert. I hear the sound of dirt crunching under footfall behind me, and I turn around. My breath catches in my throat, and my stomach drops as I see something standing not 50 feet away from me. It's large, menacing, and white. I can't even find the words to describe what this thing looked like. It looked like a very large dog, and that's a stretch. It stood on 2 short, stout legs, with long forearms reaching down past its knees. Its shoulders were broad and heaving, as if it had just ran a marathon. Its head was mostly shaped like a wolf, with a large snout filled with razor-sharp teeth, bared in a snarl, saliva dripping from its maw. Its jet-black eyes bore right through me, filled with hatred and hunger. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. This creature stood between me and my only salvation, my truck. We stared at one another for a moment until I broke the silence. "You are one ugly motherfucker," I said. It snarled at me. Then, very unexpectedly, it turned and walked away slowly, using all four of its limbs, receding into the bushes and into the night. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, wondering if it would jump out and feed on my flesh at any moment. It never came back. I ran around the front of my truck and jumped inside, locking the door quickly and flooring it as fast as you can floor an 18-wheeler, which is not at all. Soon I was back on the highway and barreling down it as if my life depended on it. For a while it felt like it did. Within a half hour I found myself at the truck stop and shut down for the night. Sleep was difficult that night. I was certain every noise I heard was that damn creature returning. Luckily the night went on without another incident. I have more stories to tell, but this is getting long, so I think I'll stop here. Remember, guys, be careful out there on the road. You never know what else is out there with you. Story number 4. I'm in a crappy band with some old high school buddies. A few weeks ago, our bassist, Pierce, informed the rest of the band that his parents had flown to Europe and left their house for us in Fort Collins. His dad is a sound engineer and has a recording studio in the house. We were ecstatic, so we packed light and made the drive from California to Fort Collins, ready to track a backlog of 8 songs we'd been sitting on. It was mid-spring, and the mountains looked like they were jutting from oceans of blue and yellow wildflowers. The drive was long, but it was nothing short of spectacular. In fact, it was so beautiful that one night after a recording session, Pierce suggested we go camping. I laughed at the idea. They all knew I'd had a somewhat negative experience in the Colorado Rockies a few years ago, but Ronnie and Jeff jumped on board and insisted I not be a wet blanket about it. Pierce recommended some vanilla tent camping at the foot of the mountain, but Ronnie had a bright idea. He wanted to do some astrophotography, and for that, he said, we need to go to a place that's really dark. So he spent some time Googling and discovered Comanche Peak Wilderness, a remote section of a popular national park. What a great idea, I remember chirping. Why, surely nothing could go wrong. Of course, shit did go wrong, and it started on the drive up there. People always forget that evening begins at around 3 p.m. in the deep woods. As soon as the sun dips behind the treetops, the gloom sets in and things get eerie. Nothing makes me more claustrophobic than the sight of that heavy murk sliding over the world. My body rejects it because my brain knows it's too early for dark. I was on edge the second the paved road gave way to dirt. The other thing people forget is just how loud the woods are at times, and how silent they become at others. The contrast between them can make your head spin. One moment it's a symphony of owls and crickets and toads, then a branch will snap or thunder will crack, and suddenly you're wondering if you've gone deaf. And then, of course, if you think about it too much, you realize just how full the darkness is with all those watchful eyes. We went in as deep as we could. We ditched Pierce's truck on the side of some forgotten road and hiked about a half-mile into the trees. There was no trail. We followed the GPS to a tiny lake nestled somewhere uphill where Ronnie could set up his cameras and get a clear view of the sky. We hadn't crossed a solitary soul after entering the preserve a few hours prior, and I felt apprehensive about the fact that no one knew where we were. By dusk, we'd set up the 2 tents Pierce had borrowed from his parents. We made a small bonfire pit between them and strung all our food up in the trees like you're supposed to. Ronnie set up his cameras along the shore, and then we waited for nightfall. My anxiety worsened as darkness ate away at the sky. The guys didn't notice. They drank and smoked and carried on. And right when the world went black, leaves began to crunch in the distance behind our tents. A girl emerged from the tree line and stopped at the edge of our little clearing. This girl was probably 8 years old and wore a white dressing gown like she'd just woken up. She had platinum blonde, almost white hair, and skin so pale she looked like a ghost in the firelight. She wasn't carrying a flashlight or anything. She'd been walking in pitch-black woods. She squinted at our fire as if it annoyed her and let out a few wet coughs. We all just stared at each other in confusion while she studied us. There were no roads or trails in this area. This was not a campground. Her presence made no sense. Jeff eventually called out to her, asking if she was okay, and she replied, "My mom's sick. Can you guys come help us?" Where is she?" Jeff asked. The girl just pointed into the forest. The trees and shadows and mist clustered together to form a great big wall of nope. I gave Jeff a subtle, fuck no, head shake. I might be a coward, but I'm not about to get disappeared by some malevolent wood pixie. Ronnie stood up and asked the girl if they were camping, or if they had a house or what. The girl just said, "She's really sick. Just follow me." She started coughing again. At this point, all four of us could sense that something was wrong. Pierce, probably the cleverest of us, invited the girl to come warm up by the fire and explain what was going on. I think he knew she'd decline. The girl just turned and walked back into the woods, coughing as she went. Before she vanished, she turned around and said something, but we couldn't be certain of what. I heard, "So you'll be a liar," but Ronnie heard, "Soon you'll meet the liar." We built the fire up a lot more, mostly to keep a good perimeter against the darkness. All of us were creeped out, but after a few hours the guys had mostly forgotten about the girl. They laughed and told stories about drunken escapades. At some point, Jeff and I went to the tree line to take a piss. I walked about 10 steps into the woods and blasted the dark with my flashlight, Jeff following closely behind. I wanted to see if there was a clearing on the other side, or a footpath the girl might have followed. But there was nothing, just a snarl of impassable trees. We heard Ronnie shouting something, so we jogged back to the fire and saw him examining the southern edge of the clearing. That was the direction we'd left the truck in. Pierce said as we passed by, he thinks he heard more footsteps. I heard them too. Standing next to Ronnie, I could make out a new pair of feet trampling the leaves in the dark. It was louder than the girl had been, probably bigger. "Show yourself," Ronnie shouted again. "We are armed." To my surprise, a woman answered him. She laughed and said, "Don't shoot, just a hiker." We moved back and watched her step into the clearing. She was probably in her late 30s and wore a raggedy hat and an old beat-up pack. I remember hearing Pierce grumble something like, "Real private spot you found here, Ronnie." And I agreed. How the fuck were all these people bumping into us way out here? The woman introduced herself as Sarah and apologized for scaring us. Ronnie demanded to know what she was doing out here, and she explained that she'd done the full-day loop around the mountain, but got lost for a while. She claimed to have found her bearings and now knew where she was going. "You know the way back," he repeated to her. "Yep, in the dark, without a flashlight." "Uh-huh, I know this area pretty well." Ronnie wasn't buying a word of it. He turned back to the rest of us and said, "We're getting cased, you guys. We're about to get robbed, soon as we fall asleep. Campers get killed by thieves and meth heads all the time." "Well, thanks for bringing us out here, dingus," Jeff said. Sarah laughed again. She was real smiley for a woman lost in the woods, in the dark. "I swear it's nothing like that," she said. "Look, I'll be on my way." For whatever reason, I felt the urge to press her further. So I said, "You know, you're not the only person we've met out here who's walking around without a light." That fake little smile fell off Sarah's face, and it took the wind right out of my sails. She stared at me like she could see down into the deepest places inside me. "You met the little girl?" she asked, with a blank expression. My bandmates all exchanged looks of incredulity. Sarah collected herself, and a new smile spread across her face. She said, "Don't listen to anything that little brat says. She's a liar, through and through. Look, why don't you guys hike down to the ranger station with me? It'll be safer together." She pointed behind herself, into the woods. Something lit up in my brain. This was the second time a stranger had tried to coax us into the dark. We weren't going to get robbed. Something much worse was about to happen. Pierce seemed to have come to the same conclusion, and he invited Sarah to instead join us around the fire. As he did with the little girl, he knew Sarah would decline. The strange woman told us she had to get back before it got any colder. And with that, she turned and hurried into the woods. After a long debate about what to do, we decided that hiking back to the truck was the fastest way to get lost or killed. We hadn't used a trail and our phone batteries were low. Every time the wind blew, it set 1,000 trees groaning and shivering, which made it impossible to orient ourselves by sound. And it was so black that if I stared into the darkness long enough, I started having minor hallucinations as my brain tried to make sense of the void. So we kept the fire blazing and agreed to sleep in two-person shifts. Since Pierce and I were the soberest of the bunch, we agreed to stay up first. But only an hour into our watch, we started hearing the coughs and sputters of a little girl in the distance. I followed Pierce to the lake's edge, which lay about 30 yards from our camp. There, we heard an eerie voice wafting on the breeze. I saw the silhouette of a person milling about near the water a few hundred feet away, and realized it was the girl. She was wandering around in the dark, singing. We booked it back to the fire and woke up Jeff and Ronnie, alerting them to the girl's presence. But as we discussed what to do, another voice erupted from nearby and began singing as well. It sounded just like Sarah. Pierce and I jumped into the tent with the other guys and sealed it up, terrified that the time had come for whatever these creeps had planned. But no one approached our camp. The two people just walked in slow half-circles behind the trees, singing together in a language I couldn't identify. Ronnie always keeps a menacing-looking trail knife on him when we go hiking, and he scrambled for it while shouting that he'd butcher anybody who came near us. His yelling caused the people outside to go quiet for a few moments. I pulled out my phone to record some of the voices, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely operate it. I caught a bit of the girl, but then something even weirder happened. None of us are certain of how many people were in those woods, but we heard a third voice at that moment. It was deeper and guttural, like the sound of some night predator stalking around in a jungle. I'm not certain the noise was made by a person. Ronnie and Jeff believe the sound is coming from the girl, who has a coughing fit and then begins channeling some demonic voice. Pierce and I think it's a third person or an animal that was with them, waiting for us to leave the safety of the bonfire. Sorry for the poor quality. I have a crappy phone. After the commotion, the activity in the woods died down for a while. The guys and I remained inside the tent, terrified, only leaving its shelter to throw more wood on the fire about once an hour. None of us slept, and for the rest of the night, we occasionally heard distant singing, laughing, coughing, and the occasional whisper. Sometimes the girl would say, "Can you help us?" in the exact same tone, as if her voice had been recorded and replayed over and over. We also heard someone, probably Sarah, climbing a nearby tree and shouting things like, "I see you boys, and let's go together. It's safe now." And that was it. By dawn, we were exhausted from terror and half frozen in the tent. The noises stopped, and the people, if they were people at all, had long abandoned their efforts to lure us into the dark. We packed up and hiked back to the truck, which had thankfully not been ransacked. As far as I'm concerned, the next time I go camping, it'll be in a treeless desert in Arizona, and I'll see if I can get Ronnie to post some of those night sky shots. Story number 5. I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas, to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit. But I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah, a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area, to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau, to the pancake-flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the "Welcome to New Mexico, the Land of Enchantment" sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I would get a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Ballin would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, my planned stop for the night. However, my daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy, just a straight shot. But looking back on it now, I figured that, had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now, and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie, bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company, and call me ironic, but Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness, an abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles, and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon, barely lit by the moonlight. I thought it was a road sign at first. Then as I came closer, I realized it was a person, walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here, all alone, at night? I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there. And they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit, giving them a wide berth. Suddenly my stereo cut out, as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm, as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh, no, 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 I thought. There's no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man, dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the lights passed him. But in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on, and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination, the darkness and the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. Indian reservations sadly had high rates of alcoholism. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me? No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. Maybe. I drove on, trying to figuring out what had just happened, but at the same time, forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Getting closer, I realized it was another figure, another person walking alone at night. There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long black hair, reaching down past the chest. No, there's no way. It was the man. The same man. But how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leapt out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did the first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks. But his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my tail lights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead. But I was still too far away. I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved. but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual on him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road, but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man, at least. I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my sight. It looked like an animal. Some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating just like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see, little by little. Then I noticed its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round, and from it came a trail of long, black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour. But this creature, it kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just, what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. Just how long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon, my car would hit its top speed. And then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheats. But regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go. But the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of shiprock came into view. It was close. So close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town, to safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now, it was slipping away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone. But this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. I let off the accelerator. The man, the creature, whatever it was finally gone for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it, my hands were extremely sore. But I was glad to have made through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called, and everything will make sense. Be careful out there. Story number 6. This personal story of mine is one that caused me to question my love for the outdoors. For what I saw out there still haunts me to this day, and sometimes on nights that are dark and still, I can sometimes see that thing, with its twisted grin and cackling chuckle. I feel like the only way to escape its memory is to share it, so I'm not the only one burdened with this. To start off, I loved the outdoors all through my childhood with a strong passion. That's why when I had a chance to visit the Rocky Mountains in northern New Mexico with one of my friends during the summer of my sophomore year in college, I jumped at the opportunity. For some more background info, my friend, who I'll call Jack, had some pretty wealthy parents, so he spent every summer traveling the world going on backpacking trips, which he, like me, loved to do. He went on backpacking trails that I could only dream to hike. He knew that I loved to backpack also, so he offered to pay for me to come along with him, knowing that there was no way I'd be able to pay for myself. This was a dream come true for me, because I grew up on the east coast of the United States and never went farther west than the Mississippi River, and I always wanted to backpack the Rockies. So the school year ends, and I had been preparing to go on the trip, and about a week away from the start of it, my friend calls me with some bad news, saying that his girlfriend got in a minor car accident and that he is going to have to miss the trip. He did, however, say that I could go by myself if I still wanted to. My natural instincts told me that it's stupid to go in the woods alone, especially in unfamiliar territory. However, this opportunity was too big to pass up, so I told him that I would. So I went without him, and I started off on the trailhead alone. In the days prior to my arrival, it had continually rained in the upper mountains, so I, being prepared for the weather, fastened on my rain gear and headed off along the stream-stricken trail. A few days later, I found myself lonely and wishing that Jack was there with me. The trip was supposed to last 2 full weeks, and it's only been 5 days, but I wanted to go home, even if it was a dream trip. I only saw 3 other people along the trail, and they were going in the opposite direction of me. Now I was thinking about calling it quits at the next stop, in a small town that was 40 miles down the trail, because, sure, I was seeing beautiful sights, but what was the point if I had no one to share them with? I wanted to get the 40 miles over with, so I continued to walk as the sun went down and hid behind the brisk mountain tops. It only took a few minutes for the darkness to creep upon me at the end of that day, but I, being determined to get home, continued on my journey with a headlamp. I didn't stop to eat dinner, so I just snacked on beef jerky while I backpacked along. I figured I made a stupid mistake with trying to get a little farther during the night, because now I was submerged in darkness. So I stopped where I was and walked only 5 feet from the trail to set up my tent. I was supposed to camp a minimum of 50 feet off the main trail, but it was so dark, I decided to break that rule just for tonight. So I set up my tent and laid down on my bed mat while hiding my face in the sleeping bag. I then slowly drifted off to sleep, listening to the sounds of nature that surrounded me. Later on, the night turned to a cold and crisp breeze. I heard a rustling coming from the outside of the tent, and at that time thought it was nothing. Then I felt the tent shake a little, and heavy breathing with snorts could be heard. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and shivers ran up and down my legs. I tried to be as still as I possibly could, as to not draw any attention to myself. Then I heard nothing like the world stopped turning, and out of nowhere, the tent was slit with a stripped gash. I tried to get out of my sleeping bag, but whatever it was, it now was on top of me. I felt my bones on the brink of breaking due to the large weight. It felt like one large paw on top of my back. The claws from it were slightly drawing blood from where they rested. I stayed as still as a rock, unmoving, because my life depended on it. Whatever it was on top of me finally got off, but never completely left the area. I finally gathered enough courage that I peeked my head through the top of the sleeping bag and looked at the destroyed remnants of my tent. I then heard the footsteps and looked, and beheld a gigantic grizzly bear that had its face in my bag, looking for food. I then remembered that I forgot to tie my bag in the tree to keep bears and other animals from reaching it. I was just too tired that I forgot, and now that simple mistake may be the cause of my death. I knew not to move a muscle or to look the bear in the eyes, so I just stayed in my sleeping bag and demolished tent for the rest of the night, undetected by the bear. The sun finally dawned over the mountains. I had stayed up all night, terrified, to the point I was immovable due to shock. I finally shook out of the trance and saw that the bear had moved on. My heart soared, and I felt like a great burden was lifted off my back. But then I remembered about my backpack, and my heart sunk. I got up and examined the damage done closely. My bag was torn and supplies were scattered. I saw all of my snacks and food were gone, and only crumbs with ripped wrappers were left. I did, however, rejoice when I saw that my water purifier was unbroken, so at least I would have clean water. I thought to myself that I may have survived the bear encounter, but without food or most of my supplies, I would be lucky if I would be able to last 3 more days. I now was in the middle of the woods with no tent, no food, and really no hope. The backpacking trail was so long and rocky that most backpackers avoided it, so getting help from other backpackers along the trail was very slim. Plus, even if I did run into other backpackers, they probably could not spare me much, because in backpacking you carry the bare minimum, so I knew I was in trouble. I scavenged what I could, and fastened my pack back together with some chewed-on twine. I then quickly got back onto the trail, where I looked all around me for campfire smoke or backpackers, but there was none to be seen. I gave up and just continued along the trail, with my head hung low. But then there were footsteps coming from up the trail, and my hope soared. I ran to where the sounds were coming from, but to my amazement, there was no one there. So I then turned around and began to walk, but then noticed a slim, pale man standing on the trail, only 10 yards away. I was surprised on how he snuck up on me, but I didn't care because now I had hope. So I talked excitedly while walking toward him, saying, I was attacked by a bear and lost all of my food and some supplies, and I was wondering if I could... I stopped mid-sentence. My insides seemed to twist with a sickening feeling, and I felt that something was off about him. The man just stood there looking at me for a moment, and then answered in a low-toned, scratchy voice, My cabin is just down this hill next to the river. If you follow me, I can show you. The man said, while he gestured down the hill. I had mixed feelings about following the man, but I had no other choice, so I overruled my better judgment and followed. As we went down, the sky dimmed to darkness as if it was night. We went far off the trail, and I felt my legs fall numb, as if where I was going was ripping at my soul. I didn't have time to think, as we were already at the bottom of the hill. The man stopped walking, and his head snapped 180 degrees, which put him face to face with me. And he stated poetically in a mangled voice, The sky is night, though it is supposed to be bright, and the fear I can feel draws me near. You can't run nor hide, so give up your pride, and I shall blow away your strife by taking your life. As soon as I heard this, I knew I made a mistake by following him, and I broke out a straight sprint for the hill. But as I tried to climb it, the rock and dirt turned to brittle sand. The hill became steeper, and I could not climb it without sliding back down because the fine sand provided no grip. I heard the man say again from the poem, and the fear I can feel draws me near. He had a smile on his face that was like none other I had seen before. It was of pure, tantalizingly evil. I then darted towards the river, but then suddenly it overflowed with muddy water, making it impossible to cross without drowning. I kept hearing the twisted poem replay in my mind. I backed away from the river, and I felt my shoulder bump something which caused me to turn around swiftly, and I turned to see the man standing right behind me. I then asked with my body trembling, "Who are you? What is going on?" The man then smiled as he disappeared in a pile of dust that scattered in the cold, uneven wind. I looked around, wondering where the man had left to, and I knew I couldn't escape, because whatever I tried was blocked off, so I gave up and curled up in a ball. I could hear the man's cackling screech, like chuckle, and it echoed in my ears like the sound of a gunshot. It was like he was everywhere but nowhere all at once. I then stood up on my feet and was struck to the ground with a hard blow to the chest. I tried to get up again, but the same thing happened with much more force, knocking the wind out of my chest, and soon I could feel a burning sensation all over my body. I tried to scream out, but no matter how hard I tried, nothing came out, as if the thing had stolen the air from my lungs. I felt my ribs being squeezed, and the air was being forced out of my body. A ring of fire formed around me, and the man appeared again. His eyes were red now, and his neck had markings around it that only could be formed by the fibers of a rope. Then the man pulled out a rope and fastened a knot into it right before he tossed it onto the ground. Then he snapped his fingers, and the rope immediately strung up on a tree that towered over me. All of this can end. All it takes is one little ride, the man said while gesturing at the rope that dangled above. My face scrunched as I yelled, "I will not kill myself because of you." Oh, in that case, these next days will be quite an experience. The devilish man answered back. I then thought back onto the poem the man had sung and recalled the words, "And the fear I can feel draws me near." I thought of this and then thought that if I did not show any fear, the man would lose his power over me somehow. So I began to stand the same way a bear would stand to protect her cubs. I cleared my thoughts and stopped sweating. The man saw this and said while cackling, "You thought back onto the poem, I see." The man's tone intensified as he continued, "You are a smart one, so it will be fun to break you. You will fall like all the others before you." The man lifted his hands, which were now turning a reddish color, to the darkened sky, where now there were trees full of hanging bodies. They swayed in the wind and were so close to each other that they would continually bump one another. I did not flinch a muscle, for I was going to live through this to see my family and friends again. The man began to talk with a smirk on his face. "You're not scared of this. All of these hanging bodies are the ones who came before you. They are all mine now, and don't you think it is quite an impressive collection?" The devilish man looked up at the bodies and continued, "I did not kill a single one of them, but simply pushed them to the breaking point. The same way I am going to push you. I broke the man's endless taunting. I will not let you get into my head and cause me to spill my own blood." The sky lightened a little bit, and the man's powers began to dwindle down. "You're fighting the fear which I impose upon you. You might be strong, but not strong enough for this." The man screeched with a raspy voice as he seemed to glide through the air towards me, and the wind quickened. The man had his hands outstretched, and his skin began to peel off, revealing a black monster of indescribable hideousness. The flakes of his outer skin were picked up by the wind and turned to flames. "Do you fear me now?" The monster screamed, stopping only inches from my face. I held back the feelings of fear that so desperately wanted to come prying out. "I'm not scared of you anymore," I stated firmly while directly staring into the creature's dead eyes. The beast grew into a rage, but then calmed down to where it bowed. Its head and backed away from me, turning into black ashes, leaving only the sound of his cackle, which caused me to shake. Immediately as this happened, I fell to the dirt, passed out. I awoke in my tent, with sweat covering my entire body. I looked around me and I had all of my food and gear, but a nasty headache. I then said to myself with a sigh of relief, it was all a bad dream. That thing that I saw doesn't and could not actually exist. I then packed my stuff, just thinking about my dream, I got all ready to go and began to walk onward on the backpacking trail. Soon I then started to pass the place in my dream where I met the man. It was strange. I never had seen this part of the trail before, but it exactly matches the trail in my dream. I shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued to walk, but my eyes wandered down to the place where I followed the man off the trail, and I saw something that chilled me, straight down to my very core. I saw in the distance the exact same man from my dream dead, hanging from a tree. Story number 7. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back, all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the U.S. by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad. It's basically camping in a metal tent. Makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So, for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps, most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there, as opposed to being bathed in light. So, I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then a sharp tap woke me up. At first I thought I had heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes, a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree. Maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird was dropped something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes. The keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still I lay there, completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hoping whoever it was, they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still the tapping continued. I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making the noise. So that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone, I presumed to be a woman, was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid, rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making, in that instant, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. For a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that, because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it, right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek, like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look as I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. There, I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light. Story number 8. I live in a small neighborhood where nothing really special happens, and neither am involved in anything bad. But almost every day a black SUV parks outside my residence, and a man with gray hair, black sunglasses, red shirt with blue stripes. I can't see his pants, since he is always in the car. He also seems to have camera and other strange equipments in his car, but I can take a closer look, since every time I try to approach a vehicle, he puts up his window and drives away, but arrives next day. This first started about 2 years ago, when I came home from school. No one was home, so I just sat down and started playing. That's when I noticed that black SUV outside my house. After about 3 hours, I was done with homework and decided to go out. But there it is, a black SUV still parked there. I thought that he might be waiting for someone from my family, or is just lost. I decided to approach the vehicle, and he looked at me for about 2 seconds, put up his window and drove away. I had that feeling that something was quite wrong, but I didn't give it a second thought. I just went to my friend's house and played football for a while. I got home, and nothing happened after that. But at midnight, I wake up to some kind of noise, like an engine sound. I looked out the window, and there again I see that black SUV with man sitting inside. His cabin lights weren't on, but he was using mobile device, and I could see his face. There it is, the same gray-haired man sitting inside. I didn't try to do anything and went to sleep. The next day, I was at school and remembered what happened last night and told it to my friend. He gave me that weird look and told me that I was just probably imagining things, and me waking up at midnight was a dream. After school, I went home with my friend. When bus dropped us off, I see that car again at my house. I told my friend about the SUV again. This time he seemed to believe me, and we decided to approach the car from the front this time. We carefully approached and peeked through the window. He seemed to notice us at the side of the corner. He quickly rolled up the window and drove away. Now my friend really believed me. We decided to do homework at my house that evening. We watched out for every car driving past my house, hoping it wasn't that SUV again. After about 2 hours, we were done with homework, and he decided to go home. It was dark outside. You couldn't make out a thing. I decided to follow him to the entrance so he could go home safely. But I noticed something at the corner of my eye. SUV. I couldn't make out color of it, but it seemed some kind of dark color. I noticed how it seemed familiar to that SUV that parked outside my house. And a sudden realization hit me. It was the same SUV. I told nothing to my friend, and when he went home, I went to second floor, on a balcony, and took out my phone, and took 2-minute video of the SUV. But I accidentally lost my balance and knocked over the empty bottle there. He seemed to notice the light on my face caused by mobile device. And again, he rolled up window and drove away. At this point, I knew something was wrong. Maybe I did do something wrong. Maybe they are some kind of agents investigating me, or even worse, a kidnapper waiting for a right moment. I begged my mom to not go to her work today and told him about this whole thing. She didn't even say anything and drove away. I was becoming paranoid. Every time I would see a car driving past the house, I would hide, hoping it wasn't that black SUV. Every time I would hear a noise in the house, I would immediately run to the storage room, where my dad has his hunting rifle. I would grab it and slowly walk to the place noise came from, but nothing. Just pure emptiness. I was going crazy. I couldn't think properly. I went to my dog, hoping I would be safe there. Suddenly I heard an engine sound outside. It was evening, so I thought my mom or dad finally arrived. I quickly ran outside with a smile, the feeling of safety, until I saw what was outside, a black SUV. I stand there, froze in fear, my eyes wide. He noticed me and quickly drove away. I stand there for about 5 minutes in a freezing cold. I finally decided to go inside and went to sleep. After a couple days, I couldn't stay home anymore. I was scared to even look outside. I would spend most of the day at my friend's house playing video games. But that still didn't make me calm. I was thinking, what would happen if he arrived at my home when I'm not there? What if he will do something to my dog? I finally decided to go home and started watching some movies. At this point, that car hasn't come to my house for a day. I thought it finally ended, and as I'm thinking about it, the car pulls up the front yard. I looked out the window. There it is, a black SUV parked just outside my front yard. It is in the perfect position that if my front door was open, he could see just what I was doing. I turned off the lights off the house, thinking he would just drive away, and after a long time, he didn't drive away. Instead, he opened a door. I was confused. I didn't think this would happen. He quietly opened my front gate. I said to myself, that's it. I'm not taking this anymore. So I quickly grabbed my dad's hunting rifle, knife, and coop of bullets. I quickly reloaded the weapon, raised it, and kicked my front door open. He seemed to heard noise, but it was late. He was too close to my door, and if he tried to run away, he wouldn't have enough time to get to his car before getting shot. He talked in deep voice. I couldn't make it out. It wasn't my language. He slowly put his hand down and mumbling some words. I finally made it out. It was Russian. After repeating about 5 times, I made it out that he was telling me to raise my weapon down. I slowly put it down, and when I was about to take my second hand off it, he reached to his side and pulled out a pistol. But after trying to shoot, he realized he didn't reload it, so I didn't have a second thought. Raised my weapon and shot him in the leg, then his stomach, and finally, when he tried to run away, in his neck. He immediately passed away. I reached for Body and put him in the back seat of his own car. I drove away to the nearest forest and abandoned his car in the cave. After that, I was starting to get messages on my phone, all in Russian. I translated a couple of them. You made a big mistake. We will end your life, like you did our friends. You don't have much time left. I decided to change my number, my Gmail, every account I had, just so I wouldn't get that messages again. It finally stopped. After 2 years, I'm still scared. Every time I see a black SUV, thinking it is that black SUV again. But every time, I'm proved wrong. Story number 9. I never enjoyed camping. I savored the comfortability that modern life affords. But every year my old group of high school friends would go up to the same lake and set up tents on the same shorefront and drink the same beers and tell the same stories. I always did enjoy that. It was kind of like having a bad job, but all your coworkers were awesome, making it just bearable. So for 2 to 3 days a year, I put myself through shitting in the woods for the laughs that came with it. We'd all drive up on the Friday after work and usually take the Monday off and stay until then. We'd park and hike 2 kilometers along the water to the campsite we always went to and set up there for the long weekend. The last time we went camping, I was running late. I had a project to finalize and it kept being sent back by my boss to be tweaked. I couldn't leave the city with my girlfriend, Kat, until after 9 p.m. A storm was at our backs, the whole drive up to the country, and it seemed to be headed right where we were. Then we hit traffic. An 18-wheeler had jackknifed, and the road was getting cleaned up. The pre-storm rain caught up to us. Kat and I didn't get to the turnoff for the camp parking lot until after midnight. I recognized all 4 of my friends' cars parked near the waterfront. Then a flurry of texts came in from my buddy Jeremy. Reception was spotty out there, so you could never really count on communication that way. The texts had been sent a few hours apart. Jeremy told me they'd switched sites this year, and that they'd finally made it to the island. The island was always spoken of as being forbidden, mostly because it was near impossible to get to. It was diamond-shaped, but longer than it was wide. It was surrounded by sharp rocks and filled with dense trees. A heavy current came at it from head-on, so it split the rush of water to both sides. This made it impossible to reach because the only side that wasn't overcome with rapids and sharp rocks was the back side, which had a high rocky cliff that jutted up 30 feet above the water. The cliff had a large, flat surface that looked out onto the lake and would have been the perfect campsite, if only it was accessible. Because of the heavy rapids and rocks, it remained untouched and was the place everyone wanted to camp, but no one could. Kayakers and boaters even avoided the rapids around it because of how sharp the rocks were. It was beautiful to look at, but treacherous and potentially fatal to attempt to conquer. That year, there'd been a serious drought in the county. It hadn't rained in weeks, so the water was down, and the rocky lake bed of the rapids were exposed. You could now walk across to the island. Jeremy said the group made a snap decision. They trekked across and camped on the site everyone had always wanted to. He told me they'd set up their tents on the rock slab that overlooked the lake, and they'd save me a spot somewhere near the back. I felt uneasy reading the texts. I didn't know much about the lake or water flow systems in general, but with the storm at our backs, who knew how long the rapids would stay down? We could get trapped on the island. Kat felt uneasy about it too. But we packed all our gear and made the trek along the waterfront to our normal campsite. From there we could see the island and all my friends' tents set up on the rock slab that overlooked the lake. The storm had caught up to us and the rain was getting heavier. Kat and I decided to stay at our normal spot for the night, and I set up a tarp overhead so we could pitch the tent without getting everything soaked. When that was done, we were both exhausted, and she crawled into her sleeping bag, but I ventured out in my rain slicker to the edge of the lake. I sent a few texts to Jeremy and the others. None of them went through, though. I looked out at the island, which was 100 yards away, and focused on the tents. Only 2 tents were visible, both with stationary lights turned on inside, causing them to glow like fireflies in the dark landscape. I couldn't see any movement, though. But that wasn't surprising. It was late. They'd all probably gone to bed. As I turned back to my tent, my flashlight caught strange shapes of rocks in the dried-up rapids, like they all had abnormally curved edges. I didn't think much of it and joined Kat in the tent. When Kat and I woke up the next morning, it was still dark out, even though it was past 10 a.m. The storm was growing heavier. We put rain gear on and went to the edge of the lake to look out at the island. The storm had caused the water to rise, just a few inches higher, but it was starting to move quickly. The visible tents looked the same on the rock slab. The flashlights were still on and in the same positions. No movement. We figured the idiots were probably still drunk or hungover and had no idea what the situation with the storm was. I yelled across to the island, but the rain and thunder masked my voice. Kat and I talked about it, and we decided to trek across the rocky floor of the lake while we could. We climbed down to the lake bed, which was 5 or 6 feet below, and made our way through the muddy and rocky terrain. As we got closer to the island, I noticed the strange-shaped rocks I saw the night before. There were a lot more than I'd previously seen. In fact, they seemed to surround the entire island. There were rows of sharp rocks jutting up all over, and huge, pointed boulders with multiple curved and sharp edges. None of them looked naturally eroded and formed by time. Though they did show aging, they looked like they'd been sharpened like fish hooks. No wonder kayakers and boaters didn't come this way. As I looked closer, I saw strange inscriptions carved into the sharper, hooked rocks. The carvings were deteriorating, but I could tell they were symbols. Someone long ago was responsible for these symbols and hooks. We continued towards the island, narrowly avoiding the pointed rocks and slippery ground. Along the edge of the island, we found a portion of the rocks that opened up and gave an entrance. We climbed the rocks and made our way onto the island. The woods were dense and dark, so we decided to move along the side of the island and up towards the rock slab and campsite. The storm was starting to get heavier and made the climb up hard. But we found our way to the campsite and saw 4 tents. There was a fire pit that was waterlogged now, some beer bottles and cigarette butts, loose garbage and foldable chairs, but no people. None of my friends were there. We looked inside all the tents and everyone's belongings were still there, but they, themselves, were missing. Kat thought maybe they were in the woods. Maybe even they'd found a cabin or shack on the interior. Something to investigate or ride out the storm in. Then I saw the carvings. The giant slab of stone we were standing on had lines of the same symbols from the hooked rocks on the lake bed. Kat noticed them too, and mentioned they looked indigenous. We found a rough pathway into the woods, but the path wasn't more than just trampled grass, shrubs and bushes, and some beer cans and cigarette butts. We followed the trail as it led further into the island's interior. The dense trees blocked out the rain from above, and any light the sky was giving off was long gone. The interior quickly felt like night, and the sounds of the storm drowned out. All we could hear were the tall, swaying trees overhead as we moved through the mossy and vine-filled woods. The trail of cans and butts came to an end, and the path disappeared. We thought about turning back, but then we heard something, a whimper, coming from somewhere ahead. It was animalistic. It sounded pained and afraid, whistling upwards at the end of each whine. I continued forward, Kat following behind me. On the path ahead, there was a long, nylon-looking rope. We followed it and found it leading us to the source of the whimpering. I realized I wasn't following a rope. It was a leash. Jeremy's pit bull, Oscar, was crouched under an upturned tree, trembling. He had several small slashes across his body. None were very deep, but they all looked like they hurt. We approached him calmly and managed to lead him out from under the roots of the tree. As we inspected him, it was undeniable that he was attacked by an animal. Kat and I whispered to each other, deciding to take Oscar, get off the island, and hike back to the car for cell reception. Something really bad had clearly happened. We cut to the right heading directly for the edge of the island, and not back through the woods the way we came. Not back to the tents. Then we heard more sounds ahead of us, echoing through the dark trees, cracks, snaps, breaks. It sounded like someone was splitting thick tree branches. Oscar started whimpering again and pulled away. Kat took that as a sign and started backing up with Oscar. She motioned for us to go to the opposite side of the island and cross there. But I needed to see what the sounds were. I motioned for her to go ahead, and I crept forward, through more trees, towards the cracking. Up ahead, I could see a small clearing in the woods. I peeked out into it and saw all the leaves and grass were red. In the center, there was a hole dug into the side of a large hill. There were clothes strewn about, all stained with the same browning red shade. Then I saw the bodies, if you could call them that. I saw Jeremy first, though it was difficult to tell it was him aside from the bright neon hunting slicker he always wore. His body, like the others, had been viciously opened up and exposed like a fillet. To his left was the source of the sounds. One of my friends, Tim, I think, was ripped in two pieces. Something was crouched between the two halves of his body. Some kind of tall, skinny, ghastly creature. The beast was all earth tone, greens and blacks and browns. It had tufts of thick, coarse black hair sticking out of various parts of its leathery skin. It was strong and powerful, and was clawing through the meat of Tim's thighs. The creature pulled out Tim's femur and bit down into it. I looked around at the other bodies and realized they were all missing their bones. The creature didn't eat their skin, muscle, or fat. It wasn't interested in meat. It just wanted to eat their bones, which had been torn, pulled, and ripped away from muscles and ligaments. Even the craniums had been broken apart, the insides cast aside as the skull was devoured. I watched the creature's jaw grind down on Tim's femur. The chewing was horrifying, the breaking, crushing, and pulverizing of bone. Then the femur snapped, and the familiar crack filled the woods again. A whimper came from the woods behind me. From Oscar. The creature jerked in my direction. I ducked behind a tree before it saw me, but I knew it'd be coming. It heard Oscar. In a low, crouched position, I started rushing back through the woods, following the path Kat and Oscar made. But I wasn't as quiet as I hoped, and sticks were cracking under my feet, echoing through the trees. A screech roared out from the woods behind me. I ran faster, knowing the creature was definitely aware other people were on the island now. Its island. I heard branches breaking and heavy movement behind me as the creature gained. Then I started to hear the storm again. The trees were becoming less dense, and I was getting to the other side of the island. I saw an opening up ahead and rushed to it. I got to the edge of the island and was greeted by a raging thunderstorm. The water had risen and the rapids were back, though they were half their normal height. I looked over to the shore and saw Kat and Oscar made it across. I climbed down quickly and started trying to make my way to them. The rapids were at my waist and pushing hard. I kept grabbing onto the larger rocks for support, but all their sharpened edges kept cutting my hands. Then Kat screamed. She was staring behind me, at the island. I turned back, only for a moment, and saw the creature had climbed down to the lake bed and was following me through the growing rapids. The creature was taller than me and moved faster than I did, but it had the same problems trying to get a footing. I kept going, Kat yelling for me to hurry, the beast behind me gaining. It was only feet away from me now, and its long, splintered claws were almost able to grab my shoulder. It swung at me, narrowly missing. I was still another 20 yards from Kat and the shorefront, and I knew the creature would catch me on the next claw swing down. The only thing I could think to do was let my legs go out from under me. Just before the creature swung down, I let my legs go limp. My body was immediately rushed forward with the rapids, and before I knew it, I was 30 yards downriver. But I slammed into one of the boulders, and a row of sharp rocks dug into my side and ripped through my bicep and into my arm. Another, sharper and pointier rock went right through my shoulder. It was incredibly painful, especially with the water pushing me away from the boulder, causing the wounds to open and tear. I heard that horrible screech again, and looked up to see the creature had done what I'd done. Only the rapids had carried it further to the right. A sharp, long rock was sticking through the creature's abdomen. It had been impaled, and was trying to pull itself forward and off, but the hooked edge of the tip was too jagged, and the rapids kept hitting the creature, forcing it back to the hilt. The creature didn't look like it was going to get free, and I realized I'd suffer the same fate if I didn't get loose from the rock I'd been snagged on. I managed to pull myself forward and free from the rocks that had lodged in my arm and shoulder. The hooks on the ends tore off a good chunk of skin and meat when I did, but I was free. I slipped and struggled and fought my way to the shore, where Kat and Oscar were waiting. I rolled both ankles and could barely stand. Kat helped me up, and we looked back at the rapids. The creature was being overcome by the rising water and heavy current. We could only see it from the chest up now, and it was beginning to give up. But when it saw us watching, it got a jolt of energy and was making a final attempt to pull itself off the rock. We didn't wait around to see if it did. I did my best to rush with Kat and Oscar through the woods, and we found a cottage not too far. We called the police from there, and a huge investigation started. But ultimately, all that was released to us or the public was there'd been a wild animal attack that had left several young adults dead on an island they weren't supposed to be on. I still think back to the rocks and boulders surrounding the island, the sharp ones, the ones I'd been stuck to and the creature died on. Up close, they were all stony fish hooks. I always thought fish hooks were used to catch something to eat, but I was starting to think these ones were used to catch something trying to escape. Whoever sharpened those rocks, however they did it, knew what they were doing. Story number 10. I am, admittedly, an odd duck. I like getting out of the house. I mean, way out of the house. Most guys my age work in some kind of cubicle job, and I'm not discounting that kind of work out of hand, but they whittle away their vacation. 3 days here, a week there. Not me. I pride myself in driving my employer's HR up the wall. I'll save it all up and disappear for a month. I was on a walkabout in high summer in the Canadian Rocky Mountains when I found the safe. You can rest assured I was miles from anywhere. In fact, I was at or near the end of my own mental and spiritual tether. When I'd go deep into the wilderness for a hike, a camping trip, or whatever, whenever I gauged that I might not have the wherewithal physically or mentally to make it back if I went any further, I'd turn around. This time, being summer, but where it was cool. Hell, I passed through snowfields a few times during my excursion. I had plenty of energy and supplies, so my trip took me deep into areas you won't find on Google Street View these days. So, the safe. It was a steel, olive drab green container, a little bigger than a shoebox. On one side and the bottom, there was a lip of ragged metal, and adhered to the back of that, a fiberglass or some other kind of composite resin. What had I found? Some mobster's stash? A 747 secret toilet? It had something inside. I could feel it shift a bit when I turned it over in my hands. It wasn't very heavy either, despite its rather formidable seeming toughness. I tucked it under my arm and started my hike back. I worked my way down the rock faces and through rough woods, towards the more well-traveled areas in the forest, until I got on a hiking trail, actually used by people who weren't weird obsessos like me, and another few hours found me back at the preserve's parking lot. I spent a few more days on the road, winding my way back down into the U.S. and finally home to California. The whole drive, I kept thinking about the strange green safe in my car's trunk. What was it? What was in it? Why was it lying on the ground, hundreds of miles from anything or anyone of note? After I got back home, I still had a few days, and so I started asking around, skimming various message boards, and so, discreetly, if this was someone's property, I didn't want to accidentally tip my hand that I'd just picked it up and walked off with it, but came up empty. I checked a book on lock-picking out at the library, but it was pointless. The four-wheeled combination locks consisted of letters as well as numbers. Most simple combinations locks merely had hundreds of thousands of permutations. This could well have millions. Work called, and I got back into my mundane routine. I wrote the safe off as probably just junk dumped by a logging or mining company, but of course it kept nagging at me. What was it? Eventually I asked around at a few pawn shops. That netted me more than a few suspicious looks. An unopened safe that looks like it was pried out of something rather hastily. Sure, pal, let me just look that up for you, and so on. Work pulled my attention away from the safe after a while, and I kept it sitting on my desk. Sometimes I'd label it suggestion box. Please open box and put suggestion, or else it can't be considered or remains of last person who paged me out after hours stored within and stuff like that. Until Harry started work. Harry was an older guy, maybe in his 50s. He had a kind of drone job. He took green bar printouts from the printing and copy room to various departments as folks did their accounting and so on. One day, I'd done a boatload of work and sent the print job down. Harry dutifully pushed his cart up to my cubicle and stuck his head in. When he saw the safe, he looked at it for a moment and then stared at me and said archly, "Why do you have that?" "What, my suggestion box? Did you want to put in a suggestion, Harry?" I smirked and patted it. He leaned in so close, I could smell the smoke from the cheap cigars he puffed on during his lunch break, and whispered at me, hissingly, "No, you dumb son of a bitch. I want to know what you're doing with the operational orders safe off of a B-52H. I have to admit I was more than a little brushed back. Harry came off as meek most of the time, and eager to please the rest. Here he just seemed nasty, intimidating, almost. Harry, it's just some junk, some scrap I found out in the Canadian Mother of God, get up right now, we're leaving." Harry pulled his sweater off and wrapped up the safe, leaning back and looking out of my cube. "Harry, what the hell? I can't just drop work, for what?" He grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and practically hauled me out of my chair. I thought he was going to berate me again, but he just frog-marched me to the exit and across the lot to his car, a nondescript Pontiac. He carefully put the safe in the middle of the bench seat and motioned me in. I have to admit I was more intrigued than scared at that moment, and I kind of wanted to see how this would play out. We drove for a half hour out of the city towards the sticks. It was a hot, sunny day, and lucky me, Harry's air conditioning blew something like a sticky, smoke-smelling damp gust that on a very good day wouldn't be considered cool. I kept trying to ask him where we were going, what the hell the safe was about, and every time he'd just glare at me until I shut up. We arrived at a bar. Not that I could tell just getting there. It was a low, gray concrete building with a ring of gravel around it, off of a frontage road near the airport. The timed rumble of a passenger jet shook the place every few minutes. He brought it into the bar with us. We were the only patrons. The nondescript appearance outside belied what the place was like inside. Aviation memorabilia decorated every wall and every surface. Propellers, bits of parachute cord, a section of wall near the ceiling in one corner held a rack with 5 flight helmets for jet pilots, and so on. Harry directed me over to a booth in the corner. He went to the bar and got a couple of drinks. I rarely touched the hard stuff, but he didn't seem in the mood to discuss the matter. I sipped bitter iodine-like scotch, bourbon, whiskey. I had no idea. While he stared at the box and took his own drink in larger gulps. Finally, he spoke. "Why the hell couldn't you have just left this where it was? Did you see anything else? Any other pieces?" No, I found this a couple months back, when I was on vacation, like I said in the..." He cut me off. "Canadian Rockies, just north of Sawtooth, between 2 rivers. You'd have been about 280 miles due east of Patch Mill, yeah?" Yeah, exactly so. "Harry, why in the hell are you so wound up about this?" He looked around the bar. No one was there except the bartender, who had his back to us as he washed a rack of glasses. Nobody was supposed to have found that. That should have burned up in a crash, wound up at the bottom of a lake, been blown to pieces or smashed to unrecognizable junk. What you have there, my friend, is the end of the world. All I could think was, holy shit. This was nuclear codes, nuclear launch codes, a target list of Soviet cities, and it had survived the crash of a B-52 bomber. Harry must have read my expression, and he continued, "It's not what you think. It's not that kind of thing. It's not H-bomb stuff. Those aren't. We don't worry about those. Nobody's dumb enough to use those. But there's other stuff. You gotta understand. Things that'd make Oppenheimer's gadgets look like Tinker toys." He trailed off for a minute and started to speak again. "I was on the flight line at Minot one night back in '72. We were beat up pretty bad, 'cause of Linebacker 2, when Nixon decided to fuck the slopes good to end the war. Except all it did was get our best planes and men shot down. Everybody was working their assess off. Planes would fly from Minot to Guam and hit the zips, and then they'd come back around, land at Cadena or Guam, or all the way home. Well, one night, without so much as a warning, they pulled everybody but a skeleton crew off of the flight line. We went to DEFCON 2. We were at DEFCON 2, kid. They had most of the guys pull back off the base. There were just some flight line guards. And can you imagine what they told us? Under no circumstances were we to allow any base personnel onto the base. Onto, kid. We had shoot-on-sight orders against any Air Force personnel who tried to come in. Well, after standing the scariest watch I ever did, just before dawn, a bunch of B-52s came in from the east. They could have been a cell returning from a mission, but they came in low, and these didn't look like any birds I'd seen before. They were black. No markings, no BU numbers on the tails, nothing. They sat on the alert runway with the engines running. Ordnance guys started loading something into the buffs. A couple of crew guys were out. Commanders, I figured. Older guys, too. Like these guys could have flown in Dubya Dubya, too. He gulped down the last of his glass and leaned close. "Kid, I've been all over the place. I seen the asshole of the world in the Philippines where kids'll dive into a cesspit if you throw a nickel in and come out with it in their teeth. I've pulled guys baked like hams out of aircraft wrecks, and I ain't never seen or heard anything as scary as I ever have that night. I was close enough to one of those crew to hear him. He didn't." Harry went pale and shuddered. He wasn't talking normally, kid. Him and the wing commander just stood there making these fucked up clicking noises at each other. I could see the commander's flight suit trim, too. Wasn't AF. Not any Air Force I recognized. The stars were all wrong. Bent, swirly. Didn't make any goddamn sense. By the early morning light, I could see the packages they were loading up on the birds had the same weird-assed stars all over them, too. I stuck my head up the crew ladder of one of those black B-52s just in time to see a crew member, looked just as old as the plane's commander, too, stuffing an envelope into the safe and shutting it tight. I got back to my watch position as quick as I could, and tried to forget what I seen. A few hours later, the alert ended. Regular crew guys started filtering back in. I asked the duty commander what had happened, and he just said Nixon had woken up bugfuck crazy and called Op-Ord Omega, but it had been canceled and I should just shut up and never repeat it to anyone. I don't think he or anyone else knew what else I'd seen. I found out a week later that a B-52 from that cell had been lost over southern Canada, and the AF had gone nuts trying to find it. One of the biggest SR jobs ever, they said. He fell silent again, then lightly touched the safe. Kid, whatever they were about to drop on Vietnam must have been a hell of a lot worse than nukes. If there's anything in this safe about it, I'd get rid of it. We left, and Harry drove back to the office in near silence. I'd try to ask him about the safe, about what might be in it, but he'd just mutter, "I don't want to think about it." Nobody'd missed us during our hour-plus absence, and he went back to pushing his cart of printouts, and I pretended to work on spreadsheets, all the while eyeing the safe and wondering what might be inside. A week and a half after Harry's freak-out, he quit coming in to work. Nobody around the office seemed to know what had happened. A few discreet inquiries later, and I found out Harry had simply disappeared from his small apartment, leaving no note or forwarding address. I tried with no success to find the Aviator's Bar near the airport. I swear I passed where it should have been, but it wasn't. Only a 2-mile run of chain-link fence and an outer boundary marker transmitter for the airport were there baking in the Southern California sun. A few days later, I took the safe to a cliffside overlooking the Pacific and chucked the safe in. Goodbye to end-of-the-world secrets. Goodbye to weird stories. And goodbye to Harry. But I'm not sure if that's going to help. Yesterday, I noticed someone who looks exactly like the bartender from the Aviator's Bar following me. You survived, for now. But the shadows aren't done with you yet. If this story gave you chills like the video, share it with someone who dares to watch and comment your thoughts, especially if you're watching in the dark. Subscribe to Spectral Shadows, where fear never sleeps, and the next nightmare is always waiting. We'll be watching.